What if I told you that in the final moments aboard the second Death Star, as Emperor Palpatine's lifeless body tumbled into the reactor core and Luke Skywalker cradled his dying father, the impossible happened? What if Vader's respirator, damaged but not destroyed, drew one more breath? What if the man who had terrorized the galaxy for decades refused to die, not out of hatred, but out of love for his son? In this timeline, death itself could not claim Anakin Skywalker. The very force that had sustained him through years of mechanical breathing now surged through his broken body with a power neither Jedi nor Sith had ever witnessed. As Luke's tears fell upon his father's scarred face, something extraordinary began to unfold. The Dark Lord of the Sith, the Emperor's enforcer, the galaxy's most feared figure, would not only survive but would rise to claim the Imperial throne. But this time, he would rule not through fear, but through something far more powerful. Before we journey into this incredible alternative timeline, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to join our community of dreamers exploring the infinite possibilities hidden within the stars. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how our global family gathers to explore these hopeful tales together. Now settle into your most comfortable position, dim those lights around you, and let the gentle sounds of evening embrace you. Pull that blanket a little closer and prepare to discover a timeline where the galaxy's greatest villain became its most unexpected savior. Tonight we explore a reality where love conquered death, where redemption transformed an empire, and where the choice to live changed everything. I'm here to guide you through this alternative universe, where darkness gave way to light, not through destruction, but through the most powerful force in any galaxy, love itself. In this reality, one man's refusal to surrender to death would cascade into changes that touched every star system, every planet, every life across the known universe. Picture this moment with me. The throne room of the second Death Star lies in ruins. Electrical systems spark and fail around the twisted wreckage of the Emperor's chair. Luke Skywalker kneels beside his father, whose breathing apparatus wheezes and struggles with each labored breath. But in this timeline, as Vader's eyes begin to dim, something incredible happens. The medical bay of an Imperial Star Destroyer receives an emergency transmission. The Dark Lord lives but barely. As the fastest medical droids in the Imperial fleet rush to stabilize the man who ruled through terror, they discover something that will change the course of galactic history. Beneath the scarred flesh and mechanical breathing, beneath decades of rage and hatred, burns a spark that even the Emperor could not extinguish, a spark that Luke's love has finally awakened. But here's what you don't know yet, what even Luke himself could never have imagined. The moment Vader chooses to fight for life rather than embrace death, the moment he decides to live not for power, but for the chance to earn his son's forgiveness, that choice sends ripples across the Force itself. Ancient Jedi prophecies begin to align in ways no one expected. Imperial governors across the galaxy receive a transmission that makes them question everything they thought they knew about power and leadership. And in the deepest vaults of the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, sealed chambers that even Palpatine never dared to open begin to respond to a presence they have waited decades to recognize. The true heir to the Empire has survived, but this heir carries within him something that will transform tyranny into protection, fear into hope, and an iron fist into an open hand. The galaxy holds its breath, unaware that its darkest chapter is about to become its most hopeful dawn. The sterile white corridors of the Imperial Medical Bay hummed with urgent activity as the most advanced medical droids in the galaxy worked to save a life that had terrorized countless worlds. Luke Skywalker stood vigil beside the treatment table, his hand never leaving his father's chest, feeling each precious heartbeat that defied death itself. Vader's breathing apparatus had been damaged beyond repair, but the medical droids had managed to construct a temporary life support system. For the first time in over 20 years, Anakin Skywalker breathed without the mechanical rhythm that had become his signature of terror. Each breath was labored, painful, but it was his own. "Luke," came the whispered voice, barely audible without. The mechanical amplification. The young Jedi leaned closer, tears streaming down his face as he heard his father's true voice for the first time. "I'm here, Father. You're going to live. We're going to make this right." The scarred face turned slightly toward his son, blue eyes that had been hidden behind red lenses for decades, now visible and filled with something that had been absent for far too long. Hope. "The Emperor is dead," Vader whispered, each word a struggle. "The Empire will fall into chaos without leadership. Millions will die in the power vacuum." Luke squeezed his father's hand gently. "Then we'll prevent that, together." But even as they spoke across the galaxy, the news of Palpatine's death was spreading like wildfire. On Coruscant, Imperial governors gathered in emergency sessions. On distant worlds, rebel cells prepared for final strikes against Imperial strongholds. The galaxy teetered on the edge of complete civil war. Admiral Piet entered the medical bay with cautious steps, his uniform crisp despite the chaos they had all survived. He had served under Vader for years, had seen the Dark Lord's terrible power firsthand, but the figure lying on the medical table seemed almost human. "My lord," Piet began hesitantly, "the fleet awaits your orders. Without the Emperor, the other admirals are questioning the chain of command. Some speak of declaring themselves independent warlords." Vader's eyes closed for a moment, and Luke could sense the internal struggle through the Force. The old Vader would have reached out through the holonet and choked any admiral who dared question his authority. But something had fundamentally changed in those final moments aboard the Death Star. "Summon the Imperial Council to Coruscant," Vader said finally, his voice growing slightly stronger. "Tell them that Lord Vader lives and claims the throne by right of succession. But also tell them this, Admiral. Any world that wishes to leave the Empire peacefully may do so. There will be no retribution." Piet's eyes widened in shock. In all his years of service, he had never heard such words from the Dark Lord. Luke felt a surge of pride through the Force. This was not the Sith Lord speaking, but Anakin Skywalker, the man who had once dreamed of freeing the slaves of Tatooine.
"Father," Luke said softly, "there's something else. Leia. She's my sister. Your daughter." Vader's breathing stopped entirely for a moment, and the medical monitors began to beep in alarm. When he finally drew breath again, tears were flowing
freely down his scarred cheeks. "My daughter," he whispered. "The princess I tortured. The leader I hunted." His voice broke completely. "How can she ever forgive me? How can anyone?" "The same way I did," Luke replied gently. "By seeing who you choose to become, not who you were forced to be." The medical droids continued their work, replacing damaged organs with cybernetic implants far more advanced than the crude life support Palpatine had provided decades earlier. But the real healing happening in that sterile room went far deeper than flesh and bone. Through the Force, Luke could feel his father's consciousness expanding, touching minds across the galaxy that had lived in fear of his very name. But instead of the cold terror they expected, they found something unprecedented: remorse, determination, and an overwhelming desire to protect rather than destroy. On Alderaan's memorial site, where only asteroids remained of a once beautiful world, rebel leaders monitoring Imperial communications detected something impossible. The transmission frequencies that had once carried orders for planetary bombardments now carried messages of ceasefire and humanitarian aid. "Send word to Princess Leia," Vader told Admiral Piet. "Tell her that Lord Vader requests an audience."
With the Rebel Alliance leadership, tell her that the Empire wishes to discuss not surrender, but transformation. Luke smiled, feeling the Force flowing around them both in ways he had never experienced.
The dark side that had corrupted his father for so long was being slowly, gently pushed aside by something far more powerful: a father's love for his children and a protector's love for those he had sworn to serve. The medical bay fell quiet except for the steady rhythm of the new life support systems. But across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings who had hidden in shadows for decades began to emerge into the light. The news spread in whispers at first, then in bold proclamations. The Dark Lord of the Sith was dead, but from his ashes had risen something the galaxy had never seen before: an emperor who chose compassion over fear, protection over control, and love over power. Within days of the announcement, the first ripples of change began to spread across the galaxy like gentle waves across a still pond. Princess Leia Organa stood in the command center of the Rebel flagship, staring at the holographic message that had arrived just hours before. The face that appeared was not the black mask she had come to despise, but the scarred, human features of Anakin Skywalker.
"Princess Leia," the transmission began, and she could hear the tremor of emotion in his unmasked voice. "I know that I have no right to call you daughter. I know that the pain I have caused you, the worlds I have destroyed, the people you have
lost because of my actions cannot be undone with words, but I want you to know that every breath I take from this moment forward will be dedicated to healing the wounds I have inflicted upon this galaxy. And if you will permit it, I would like to begin by returning something that was taken from you." The hologram shifted to show vast Imperial warehouses filled with artwork, archives, and cultural treasures from Alderaan that had been preserved in Imperial vaults. Leia's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized paintings from the royal palace, books from the Great Library, even the ceremonial robes of her adoptive mother. Mon Mothma placed a gentle hand on Leia's shoulder. "It could be a trap." "No," Leia whispered, feeling something through the Force that Luke had been teaching her to sense. "This is real. He's really changed." Across the galaxy on Coruscant, Vader stood in what had once been Palpatine's throne room, but the oppressive atmosphere had been completely transformed. Gone were the red Imperial guards and the towering obsidian throne. In their place, he had installed a simple circular table where he could meet with advisors as equals rather than subjects. Grand Admiral Thrawn entered with his characteristic measured pace, his red eyes studying the changes with tactical precision. "My lord, the transformation you are implementing is unprecedented. However, I must advise caution. Many Imperial officers view these changes as weakness." "Then they are welcome to leave," Vader replied calmly, his new breathing apparatus much quieter than his previous mask. "I would rather command a smaller fleet of those who choose to serve the people than a vast armada of those who serve only themselves." Luke entered the chamber carrying a data pad, his Jedi robes replaced with simple diplomatic attire. "Father, and son had spent countless hours together in recent days, with Luke teaching Anakin meditation techniques while learning the complexities of galactic governance in return. The Corellian system has agreed to remain in the Empire under the new terms, Luke reported. They're actually requesting additional Imperial protection for their trade routes, but they want assurance that their local government will remain autonomous. Granted, Vader nodded. What of the other core worlds? Most are cautiously optimistic. Naboo has already pledged full support, and their queen has offered to host peace negotiations between Imperial loyalists and rebel representatives. Vader's expression softened at the mention of Naboo, Padme's homeworld. Through their new bond, Luke could sense his father's memories of happier times, of a young queen who had believed that diplomacy could solve any conflict. "And Leia?" Vader asked quietly. "She's agreed to meet with you," Luke said gently. "But she wants the meeting to take place on neutral ground. She suggested Naboo as well." For the first time since his recovery, Vader smiled. It was a hesitant, uncertain expression on his scarred face, but genuine nonetheless. Meanwhile, on Tatooine, something extraordinary was happening. Imperial forces that had once enforced the will of distant masters were now working alongside former slaves to dismantle the very system that had kept beings in bondage. Watto's junkyard had been converted into a center for freed slaves to learn technical skills, and the announcement had come directly from the Emperor himself. Slavery was now punishable by life imprisonment throughout Imperial space. Owen and Beru Lars stood in their doorway, watching Imperial transports deliver supplies to moisture farmers who had struggled for generations. Beru wiped tears from her eyes as she remembered the little boy who had dreamed of freeing every slave in the galaxy. "He's keeping his promise," she whispered to Owen. "After all these years, he's finally keeping his promise." The transformation was not without its challenges. On several Outer Rim worlds, Imperial warlords attempted to establish their own territories, rejecting Vader's new philosophy of protection over domination. But rather than responding with overwhelming force as the old Empire would have, Vader's new approach was methodical and precise. He would arrive at each rebellious system personally, not in a star destroyer bristling with weapons, but in a simple diplomatic vessel. He would meet with the warlords face to face, offering them a choice: join the new empire and help build something better, or leave Imperial space peacefully with their personal fortunes intact. Most chose to stay. There was something compelling about this changed man, something that inspired loyalty rather than demanded it through fear. His presence in the Force had become a beacon of calm strength rather than seething darkness. On Kashyyyk, Chewbacca stood with his family as Imperial engineers worked to repair the damage done during years of Wookiee enslavement. The great trees that had been scarred by industrial machinery were being carefully healed, and Wookiee culture was being restored and celebrated rather than suppressed. The news reached every corner of the galaxy. The Empire was changing, transforming from within by the very man who had once been its darkest enforcer. And as each world experienced this new approach firsthand, hope began to bloom in places where it had been extinct for decades. But the greatest change was yet to come, as father prepared to face daughter for the first time since learning the truth of their connection. The gardens of Theed Palace on Naboo had never been more beautiful. Queen Jamila had ordered the most peaceful section of the royal grounds, prepared for a meeting that would either heal the galaxy's deepest wounds or tear them open forever. Ancient fountains sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, while exotic flowers from across Naboo's diverse ecosystems created a tapestry of colors and gentle fragrances. Luke Skywalker arrived first, his calm presence in the Force helping to soothe the nervous energy of the palace guards. He had spent the journey from Coruscant in deep meditation with his father, preparing for this moment that would determine not just their family's future, but the fate of billions across the stars. Leia's transport landed in the palace courtyard, with rebel escort fighters maintaining a respectful distance. As she emerged from the ship, her white diplomatic robes flowing in the gentle Naboo breeze, Luke could sense the storm of emotions within her. Fear, anger, hope, and love all warred for dominance in her heart. "Sister," Luke greeted her with a warm embrace. "Thank you for coming." "I had to," Leia replied softly. "For the galaxy, for our family, and for the billions who deserve better than endless war." They walked together through the palace corridors, past murals depicting Naboo's long history of peaceful resolution and diplomatic triumph. Queen Jamila herself escorted them, her young face grave with the weight of hosting such a momentous occasion. "The Emperor arrived an hour ago," she informed them quietly. "He spent most of that time sitting alone in the memorial garden, the one dedicated to Senator Amidala."
"I've never seen a man look so lost." Leia's steps faltered slightly at the mention of her birth mother's name. Luke steadied her with a gentle touch, sharing his strength through their growing Force bond. When they reached the garden, they found
Anakin Skywalker sitting on a simple stone bench beneath a flowering tree that Padme had planted decades before. He wore no imperial regalia, no symbols of power or authority. Instead, he was dressed in simple brown robes that reminded Luke of Obi-Wan's old Jedi attire. He looked up as they approached, and Leia saw her father's face clearly for the first time. The scars told a story of pain and redemption, but his eyes held a gentleness she had never expected. When he stood to greet them, his movements were careful, respectful, making no assumptions about their comfort with his presence. "Leia," he said simply, and the single word carried decades of regret and hope. "Lord Vader," she replied formally, though her voice trembled slightly. "Not Lord Vader," he said gently. "That man died when the Emperor fell. I am Anakin Skywalker, and I would be honored if you would call me by that name. Though I understand if you prefer not to." They sat together in a circle beneath the flowering tree, with Luke serving as a bridge between father and daughter. Queen Jamila had provided refreshments, but none of them touched the delicate Naboo tea as they navigated the most important conversation any of them would ever have. "I cannot ask for your forgiveness," Anakin began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What I did to your world, to your people, to you personally, is unforgivable. I destroyed your home, tortured you, hunted you across the galaxy. I am responsible for the deaths of billions, including the woman who raised you with such love and wisdom." Leia's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze steadily. "Then why should I trust anything you say now?" "Because," Luke interjected gently, "he's not asking for trust. He's asking for the chance to earn it through actions, not words." Anakin nodded gratefully to his son. "Your brother is wise. I know that redemption cannot be granted through conversation. It must be earned through a lifetime of service to those I have wronged. But I wanted you to know that every decision I make from this moment forward will be guided by a simple question. What would make amends for the pain I have caused?" He reached into his robes and withdrew a small carved wooden token. Leia recognized. It immediately as one of her mother's meditation stones from Alderaan. I have been returning artifacts to the survivors of every world the Empire destroyed, he said softly. But this one belongs to you personally. Queen Breha carried it with her always, and I thought you should have it. Leia took the stone with trembling hands, feeling the smooth surface that her adoptive mother had touched countless times. Through the Force, she could sense the love and peace that still clung to the simple object. "There's something else," Anakin continued. "The Imperial Senate is being reconstituted, but this time with real power to govern. I want you to serve as the representative for all displaced peoples, all those who suffered under Imperial rule. Your voice should be the strongest in determining how we rebuild." "You would give me power over the very empire that destroyed my world?" Leia asked in amazement. "The empire that destroyed your world is gone," Anakin replied firmly. "What we build from its ashes must be something worthy of the woman you've become, something that honors the memory of everyone we've lost." Luke watched as the Force flowed between father and daughter, carrying emotions too deep for words. Slowly, carefully, Leia reached out and placed her hand over her father's scarred one. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "Not yet. That will take time and actions and proof that this change is real, but I'm willing to work with you to build something better, for Luke, for our mother's memory, and for every being in this galaxy who deserves to live without fear." Anakin's tears fell freely now, and Luke felt a shift in the Force itself as three hearts that had been separated by darkness finally began to beat in harmony. The galaxy's healing had truly begun. In the months that followed the meeting on Naboo, something unprecedented began to unfold across the galaxy. Relationships that had been forged in the fires of war slowly transformed into bonds of trust and mutual respect. The Imperial Palace on Coruscant, once a symbol of oppression, became a center of healing where former enemies worked side by side to rebuild what had been broken. Leia found herself spending more time on Coruscant than she had ever imagined possible. Her role as representative for displaced peoples had evolved into something far more significant as she worked directly with Anakin to draft the new Imperial Constitution. Their conversations, initially formal and cautious, gradually became the discussions of a daughter teaching her father about the galaxy he was learning to truly serve. The Alderaanian approach to conflict resolution, Leia explained one evening as they reviewed proposals for regional governance, was based on the principle that every voice deserved to be heard before any decision was made, even the voice of children, because they would inherit the consequences of our choices. Anakin listened with the attention of a devoted student, taking notes in his own hand rather than relying on protocol droids. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly, both of them. Queen Breha for raising such a wise leader, and Padme for seeing her ideals live on through you. Luke had established a small meditation garden on one of the palace's upper terraces, where the three siblings often gathered in the evenings. It had become their sanctuary, a place where they could simply be a family rather than leaders of galactic governments. Luke had begun teaching both Leia and Anakin more advanced Force techniques, not for combat, but for understanding and healing. "Feel the connections," Luke guided them during one particularly peaceful sunset session. "Every being in this galaxy is linked through the Force. When we strengthen one, we strengthen all." Anakin's progress in learning to channel the light side was remarkable, though not without its challenges. Years of anger and hatred had left deep scars in his connection to the Force, but slowly, gently, those wounds were healing. Leia found herself amazed by her father's dedication to this internal transformation, spending hours each day in meditation, and self-reflection. But it was not just the Skywalker family that was growing closer. Across the galaxy, former adversaries were discovering common ground they had never thought possible. On Coruscant, Admiral Akbar worked alongside Grand Admiral Thrawn to develop new patrol strategies that protected trade routes without intimidating local populations. Their tactical discussions, once focused on destroying each other's fleets, now centered on safeguarding civilian shipping and preventing piracy. Mon Mothma had accepted a position as Secretary of Galactic Affairs, working directly with Anakin to coordinate humanitarian efforts across former battlefields. Her first meeting with the Emperor had been tense, both leaders carrying memories of the devastation their conflict had caused. But as they worked together to establish relief programs for war refugees, a genuine respect had developed between them. "You surprise me," Mon Mothma admitted during one late-night planning session. "I expected a tyrant learning to play at democracy. Instead, I find a man genuinely committed to healing the wounds he helped create." "I had excellent teachers," Anakin replied, glancing toward the terrace where Luke and Leia were sharing a quiet dinner. "My children showed me that strength comes not from controlling others, but from empowering them to flourish." On distant worlds, Imperial governors who had once ruled through fear were learning new approaches to leadership. Governor Price of Lothal worked with Rebel Cell leader Ezra Bridger to establish youth programs that channeled young people's energy into rebuilding rather than resistance. The transformation was so successful that other systems began requesting similar partnerships. Even Chewbacca had become an unlikely ally, serving as an ambassador between the new empire and the various non-human species that had suffered under Imperial xenophobia. His presence in Imperial councils sent a powerful message that all beings were valued in this new order. The most surprising relationship to develop was between Leia and her father's former admiral, Firmus Piet. The man who had once carried out orders to hunt down rebel ships now served as Leia's chief military advisor, helping her understand Imperial fleet capabilities while she taught him about rebel innovation and resourcefulness. "You know," Piet confided to her one day as they reviewed defense protocols, "I spent years watching your father struggle with his conscience. I could see the conflict in him, especially after he learned of Luke's existence, but I never imagined he had the strength to choose love over power." Romance, too, began to bloom in unexpected places. Luke found himself drawn to Mara Jade, a Tichichi former Emperor's hand, who had chosen to serve the new Empire's intelligence services. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice rather than the passion and secrecy that had marked his parents' love. For Anakin himself, the possibility of love seemed impossible until he met Dr. Elara Thorne, the head of the new Imperial Medical Initiative. She had been working to establish healing centers on worlds devastated by war, and her compassion for all beings regardless of their allegiances reminded him powerfully of Padme. Their courtship was gentle and patient, two souls who had both known great loss learning to hope again. Leia watched her father's tentative happiness with a mixture of protectiveness and joy. She had not expected to care about his personal welfare, but seeing him discover that he was capable of both giving and receiving love had softened her heart in ways she was still learning to understand. The galaxy itself seemed to exhale in relief as these new bonds strengthened. Trade flourished along routes that had been battlegrounds just months before. Cultural exchanges brought art, music, and knowledge to worlds that had been isolated by war. Children born on former Imperial strongholds played alongside those from former rebel worlds, growing up in a universe where their parents' conflicts seemed like ancient history. As these relationships deepened and multiplied, the foundation was being laid for a truly transformed galactic community. The transformation, spreading across individual worlds, began to coalesce into something far grander as entire star systems embraced the new imperial philosophy. What had started as personal healing between the Skywalker family now rippled outward in waves that touched every corner of civilized space. On Ryloth, the Twi'lek people, who had suffered generations of imperial slavery, found themselves working alongside former imperial officers to establish the galaxy's most advanced education system. The planet that had once exported its children as servants now became a beacon of learning, with universities that attracted students from across the known worlds. Cham Syndulla, the former resistance leader, served as planetary governor alongside Imperial Admiral Constantine, their combined expertise creating a model of cooperation that other systems rushed to emulate. The Coruscant Senate, reconvened for the first time since Palpatine's rise to power, bore little resemblance to the corrupt body that had enabled the Empire's birth. Representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered not to pursue personal power, but to address the galaxy's greatest challenges collectively. Anakin had insisted that the Emperor's role be largely ceremonial, with real authority resting in the hands of elected officials who understood their local population's needs. Senator Bail Prestor Organa, miraculously discovered to have survived Alderaan's destruction while on a diplomatic mission, returned to find his adoptive daughter serving as the moral center of galactic government. The reunion between Bail and Leia brought tears to even the most hardened political observers, and his wisdom became invaluable in crafting legislation that balanced justice with mercy. The economic transformation was perhaps the most visible change to ordinary citizens across the galaxy. Weapons factories that had churned out instruments of war for decades were retooled to produce medical equipment, agricultural machinery, and infrastructure development tools. The planet Kuat, once solely dedicated to building star destroyers, now manufactured hospital ships that brought healing to remote worlds. Anakin's personal involvement in these conversions surprised many. The Emperor himself would arrive unannounced at former weapons plants, working alongside engineers to design new production lines. His technical expertise, honed during his years as a young mechanic on Tatooine, proved invaluable in reimagining industrial processes for peaceful purposes. The mining guild, which had exploited workers across the Outer Rim for generations, found itself completely reorganized under the new Imperial Labor Protection Act. Lando Calrissian, now serving as administrator of mining operations, worked with former Imperial engineers to develop extraction techniques that prioritized worker safety and environmental protection over pure profit. Cloud City became the model for how resource extraction could benefit local communities rather than distant corporations. Perhaps most remarkably, the galaxy's criminal syndicates began to wither as legitimate opportunities expanded. Smugglers, like Han Solo, found themselves recruited as legitimate cargo haulers for humanitarian relief efforts. The skills that had made them successful in the underworld proved perfectly suited to navigating complex supply chains in service of rebuilding efforts. Jabba's former criminal empire on Tatooine was replaced by a cooperative of freed slaves who transformed the desert world into a hub for renewable energy research. The twin suns that had once seemed like a curse now powered fusion reactors that supplied clean energy to entire sectors. Anakin's return to his homeworld, accompanied by Leia and Luke, marked the symbolic completion of his personal journey from slave to liberator. The Jedi temples that had stood empty since Order 66 were gradually reopened, but not as centers of an exclusive warrior class. Instead, they became schools of philosophy and healing where beings of all species could learn to connect with the Force in peaceful ways. Luke established the principle that Force sensitivity was a gift to be shared, not hoarded. and that the ancient Jedi restrictions on emotional attachment had contributed to their downfall. Ahsoka Tano emerged from hiding to help establish these new Force academies, her wisdom bridging the gap between the old Jedi ways and the more open philosophy Luke advocated. Her reunion with Anakin was deeply emotional, as master and former apprentice reconciled not just their personal relationship, but their understanding of what it meant to serve the Force. The new Imperial Navy operated on principles that would have been unthinkable under Palpatine's rule. Instead of star destroyers designed to intimidate through overwhelming firepower, the fleet consisted primarily of hospital ships, exploration vessels, and defense platforms that protected rather than threatened local populations. When pirates or slavers emerged to exploit the transition period, Imperial forces responded with precision strikes that captured rather than killed, offering rehabilitation programs that addressed the root causes of criminal behavior. Captain Rex, now serving as a senior advisor on military ethics, worked with former Imperial officers to develop rules of engagement that prioritized protecting civilian populations above all other considerations. The clone troopers' experience fighting alongside Jedi during the Clone Wars proved invaluable in training a new generation of soldiers who saw themselves as guardians rather than conquerors. Trade agreements that had once favored core worlds at the expense of outer rim territories were completely restructured. The planet Lothal, which had been strip-mined for resources under Imperial rule, became a center for agricultural innovation that fed dozens of neighboring systems. Former rebel pilot Wedge Antilles established a merchant marine academy there, training young people from across the galaxy in both piloting skills and ethical business practices. Cultural renaissance flourished as censorship was lifted and artistic expression encouraged. The Holonet, once a tool of Imperial propaganda, became a forum for sharing music, art, literature, and ideas across species barriers. Twi'lek dancers, Ithorian singers, and human poets collaborated on works that celebrated diversity rather than promoting conformity. The medical advances that emerged from this cooperation were extraordinary. Dr. Ilara Thorne's team, working with healers from dozens of worlds, developed treatments for diseases that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. The Bacta shortage that had made medical care a luxury became a relic of the past as new healing techniques combined traditional medicine with force-enhanced therapies. As these transformations accelerated and multiplied, even the most skeptical observers began to believe that lasting peace might truly be possible. The galaxy that had known war for generations was learning to hope again. Yet even in this transformed galaxy, new challenges emerged that tested the foundations of everything Anakin and his allies had built. The very success of their peaceful revolution created unexpected problems that required wisdom, patience, and difficult choices that would define the true character of their new order. The first major crisis came from an unexpected source: prosperity itself. As trade flourished and worlds grew wealthy under the new imperial system, some populations began to take their newfound peace for granted. Young people who had never known war started to romanticize the rebellion era, viewing the current cooperation as boring compared to the exciting stories their parents told of daring raids and narrow escapes. On Corellia, student demonstrations erupted not against oppression but against what protesters called enforced harmony. Young Corellians demanded the right to pursue their own destiny without imperial oversight, even if that meant returning to the dangerous independence that had characterized the pre-Empire era. Leia found herself in the strange position of mediating between protesters who wanted more freedom and a government that was trying to give them everything they needed. "They don't understand what they're asking for," she confided to Luke during one of their evening walks through the palace gardens. "They've never seen what happens when cooperation breaks down." "Maybe that's not a failure," Luke replied thoughtfully. Maybe it's a sign that we've succeeded so well that conflict seems impossible to them. But we need to help them understand that peace isn't automatic. It requires constant choice and effort. Anakin struggled with his response to these protests. Every instinct from his Imperial days urged him to simply impose order, to remind these young idealists of the benefits they enjoyed, but his new understanding of leadership demanded a different approach. He chose to visit Corellia personally, not with a fleet of star destroyers, but alone, accompanied only by a small diplomatic detail. The confrontation in Corellia's central plaza was unlike anything in Imperial history. The Emperor of the Galaxy stood before a crowd of angry young people and listened. For hours, he heard their grievances, their dreams, their fears that they were being denied the chance to prove themselves as their parents had during the war years. "You want the right to fail," Anakin said finally, his voice carrying across the plaza without amplification. "You want the freedom to make mistakes, to face real consequences, to earn your own victories rather than inheriting them from us." The crowd fell silent, surprised that he had understood their deepest concerns so clearly. "Then you shall have it," he continued. "Any world that wishes to withdraw from Imperial protection may do so, but understand this: once you choose independence, you cannot return at the first sign of hardship. Freedom means accepting responsibility for both success and failure." 3 systems chose to leave Imperial protection within the month. Within a year, 2 had requested readmission after struggling with piracy, economic instability, and internal conflicts they couldn't resolve alone. The third, Malastare, flourished as an independent world but maintained close trade relationships with the Empire, proving that separation didn't have to mean hostility. A more serious challenge emerged from the Outer Rim, where crime lords displaced by Imperial reforms began organizing into a confederation of their own. These criminals, led by a cunning Hutt named Grappa the Ruthless, established strongholds in the unknown regions and launched raids against peaceful Imperial worlds, deliberately targeting the humanitarian projects that symbolized the New Order. The old Empire would have responded with overwhelming force, obliterating entire systems to eliminate the threat. But Anakin's new philosophy demanded a more measured approach that didn't compromise the values they were trying to protect. Han Solo, now serving as an intelligence operative, infiltrated Grappa's organization with a plan that would have been impossible under the old regime. Instead of gathering information for a military strike, his mission was to identify the root causes driving beings to join criminal organizations and to offer alternatives that addressed their underlying needs. "Most of them aren't evil," Auntie reported during a strategy meeting with Anakin, Leia, and Luke. "They're desperate. Grappa promises them belonging, purpose, and the excitement they can't find in legitimate work. If we can offer those same things through legal channels, we can drain his support base without firing a shot." The solution they developed was revolutionary. The Imperial Adventure Corps, a civilian organization that offered young people from across the galaxy the chance to explore uncharted regions, establish new trade routes, and bring aid to isolated worlds. The excitement and danger that potential criminals sought was channeled into constructive purposes that served the greater good. Ezra Bridger, now a respected Jedi Knight, led the first Adventure Corps expedition into the unknown regions. His team included former smugglers, rehabilitated pirates, and young idealists from dozens of worlds. Their mission was not to conquer or claim territory, but to map new hyperspace routes and establish peaceful contact with undiscovered civilizations. The psychological challenge Anakin faced during this period was perhaps the most difficult of all. As threats emerged that tested his new philosophy, voices within his own government began suggesting that perhaps some situations required the old imperial approach. Grand Admiral Thrawn, despite his loyalty to the New Order, privately argued that surgical strikes against criminal strongholds would save more lives than prolonged diplomatic efforts. The greatest test of wisdom, Dr. Ilara Thorne observed during one of her private conversations with Anakin, is maintaining your principles when they seem inconvenient. Anyone can be peaceful when peace is easy. Anakin's response revealed the depth of his transformation. Rather than retreating into isolation to grapple with these temptations alone, he created a council of advisors specifically tasked with challenging his decisions.
Leia, Luke, Mon Mothma, and even former enemies like Admiral Akbar were given the explicit responsibility to oppose him whenever they believed he was straying from the principles they had established together. "Hold me accountable," he told them
during the council's first meeting. "I have been a tyrant before. I know how easy it is to justify terrible choices in the name of the greater good. If I begin to slide back into those patterns, stop me, even if it costs me the throne." This council would soon face its greatest test as news arrived from the unknown regions of a threat that challenged everything they believed about the possibility of universal peace. The crisis arrived not in the form of armies or fleets, but as a single, damaged refugee ship limping through hyperspace toward the galaxy's edge. Its occupants told a story that chilled even the most optimistic leaders of the new empire. An extragalactic species called the Yuuzhan Vong had begun probing the unknown regions, bringing with them a philosophy of conquest and biological warfare that made the old empire's methods seem gentle by comparison. These alien invaders viewed mechanical technology as an abomination and sought to reshape entire worlds using living organisms as weapons. They had already consumed 3 star systems
on the galaxy's rim, transforming thriving civilizations into unrecognizable landscapes of coral and sinew.
Most terrifyingly, they appeared to exist outside the Force itself, making them invisible to Jedi senses and immune to many Force abilities. The news reached Coruscant during a celebration of the 3rd anniversary of the new Empire's founding. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy had gathered to commemorate the transformation that had brought peace to countless worlds. Children who had grown up knowing only cooperation and abundance played in the palace gardens, while their parents shared stories of the dark times that now seemed like ancient history. Anakin received the refugee ship's transmission in his private study, with Luke, Leia, and Dr. Thorne present as witnesses. The holographic images of coral-encrusted planets and biotechnological horrors created a stark contrast to the sounds of celebration drifting in from the gardens below. "How do we fight
an enemy we cannot sense?" Luke asked quietly, his usual calm shaken by the implications of what they had seen.
How do we protect our worlds from creatures that exist outside the very force that binds the galaxy together?" Leia's political instincts immediately grasped the larger challenge. More importantly, how do we respond to this threat without becoming the thing we've worked so hard to leave behind? The old empire would have mobilized every fleet and scorched the unknown regions clean, but that would destroy everything we've built. The debate that followed tested every principle they had established. Admiral Thrawn presented detailed tactical analyses showing that conventional Imperial doctrine would be ineffective against Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology. Mon Mothma argued for diplomatic contact, insisting that even these aliens might be reasoned with if approached correctly. Captain Rex advocated for defensive preparations while maintaining their commitment to peaceful solutions. But it was Dr. Thorne who posed the question that cut to the heart of their dilemma. If we abandon our principles to fight this threat, how are we different from any other empire in history? But if we maintain our principles and our people suffer for it, how do we justify that sacrifice? Anakin found himself facing the ultimate test of his transformation. The old Vader would have seen this as validation that peace was weakness, that only strength could protect those he loved. Every lesson Palpatine had taught him whispered that compassion was a luxury he could no longer afford. Instead, he turned to the wisdom he had learned from his children. "We don't choose between our principles and our people's safety," he said finally. "We find a third option that protects both." The solution they developed was unlike anything in galactic history. Rather than preparing for war, they began the largest evacuation and protection effort ever attempted. Every world in the Outer Rim was offered the chance to relocate deeper into Imperial space, with the Empire providing transportation, housing, and resettlement assistance for entire populations. Simultaneously, they launched an unprecedented research initiative combining the best scientific minds from across the galaxy with Jedi wisdom and even reformed Sith knowledge. If the Yuuzhan Vong existed outside the Force, perhaps the answer lay not in fighting them directly, but in understanding the nature of the Force itself well enough to find new ways to reach them. Ezra Bridger's Adventure Corps expeditions took on new urgency as they searched for ancient civilizations that might have encountered similar threats. On Mortis, in the mysterious realm where the father, son and daughter had once maintained the balance of the Force, they discovered records of previous extragalactic incursions and the methods used to resolve them without violence. The most remarkable discovery came from an unexpected source, Darth Plagueis' hidden laboratory on Munilinst. Among the Sith Lord's research into life and death, Imperial scientists found theoretical frameworks for biological technologies that could match Yuuzhan Vong capabilities without requiring the torture and sacrifice that characterized the invaders' methods. "He was trying to create life," Dr. Thorne explained as she reviewed Plagueis' notes with Anakin. "The Sith approach was to dominate and corrupt life, but the underlying science is sound. We can use this knowledge to heal rather than harm, to create rather than destroy." As preparations intensified, something beautiful emerged from the crisis. The threat that could have torn apart their carefully built cooperation instead strengthened it. Former enemies worked together with unprecedented dedication, united by a common purpose that transcended their old conflicts. The Kaminoans, master cloners who had once created the Republic's army, now developed biological countermeasures designed to heal rather than harm. Geonosian engineers worked alongside Corellian shipwrights to design vessels that could function in environments corrupted by Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology. Even the Night Sisters of Dathomir contributed their knowledge of life magic, showing how their ancient arts could be used for protection and healing. Luke established a new order of Force users that included beings from every tradition: Jedi, Reformed Sith, Night Sisters, and even individuals with no formal training but natural sensitivity to life energies. This diverse group discovered that their combined understanding of the Force was far greater than any single tradition could achieve alone. The moment of ultimate test came when a Yuuzhan Vong advanced scout fleet arrived at the edge of Imperial space. Instead of meeting them with star destroyers and turbo lasers, Anakin led a diplomatic mission in a single, unarmed vessel. His companions included Luke, Leia, representatives from every major species in the galaxy, and most surprisingly, several reformed Imperial officers who had once served the dark side but now embodied the possibility of redemption. As their ship approached the alien fleet, Anakin reflected on how far he had traveled from the angry young man who had first put on Vader's mask. The greatest battle of his reign would be fought not with lightsabers or force lightning, but with the power of understanding and the courage to remain true to his principles, even in the face of absolute opposition. The diplomatic vessel approached, the Yuuzhan Vong fleet with deliberate slowness, broadcasting messages of peaceful intent in every language known to the galaxy. Anakin stood on the bridge, his breathing steady and calm despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Beside him, Luke and Leia maintained their own composure, their presence in the Force a beacon of harmony that even the alien scouts might somehow sense. The Yuuzhan Vong response was immediate and predictable. A barrage of biomissiles that dissolved harmlessly against the ship's experimental shields, technology developed through the combination of Imperial engineering and Jedi understanding of protective Force barriers. The aliens' confusion at their weapons' failure created the opening Anakin had hoped for. "Supreme Overlord Shimra," Anakin transmitted directly to the lead bioship using intelligence gathered by Ezra's expeditions. "I am Anakin Skywalker, Emperor of the Galactic Empire. I come not to fight, but to understand what drives you to consume worlds that could instead flourish alongside your own." The response came in the form of a massive creature that emerged from the flagship's hull, its coral carapace gleaming with bioluminescent threats. But within its alien features, Anakin recognized something familiar, the same desperate hunger for belonging that had once driven him to the dark side. The negotiations that followed lasted for days, conducted in the strange environment of the Yuuzhan Vong command ship. The aliens' initial hostility gave way to puzzlement as they encountered beings who refused to be intimidated, but also refused to fight. Luke's ability to sense life energy allowed him to perceive the Yuuzhan Vong despite their absence from the traditional Force, while Leia's diplomatic skills proved invaluable in finding common ground between radically different worldviews. This breakthrough came when Dr. Thorne, analyzing samples of Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology, made a startling discovery. The aliens' living ships and weapons were not just tools, but symbiotic partners that suffered when used for destruction. The pain of these creatures, amplified across their entire fleet, created a constant background of anguish that drove the Yuuzhan Vong to seek release through conquest. "They're not conquerors by choice," she explained during a tense moment when negotiations seemed ready to collapse. "They're prisoners of their own technology, trapped in a cycle of causing pain to beings they're symbiotically connected to. Every act of destruction hurts them as much as their victims." This revelation transformed the entire dynamic of their encounter. Instead of seeing the Yuuzhan Vong as invaders to be repelled, Anakin began to understand them as fellow sufferers in need of healing. His own experience with being trapped by technology that caused constant pain gave him unique insight into their predicament. The solution they eventually developed required the combined efforts of the galaxy's greatest minds and hearts. Imperial scientists worked with Jedi healers and Yuuzhan Vong biotechnicians to develop new symbiotic relationships that enhanced rather than tormented the living technologies. The process was slow and delicate, requiring each Yuuzhan Vong to voluntarily undergo a transformation that would free them from their cycle of pain. Not all the aliens accepted this offer. Some, too deeply scarred by generations of suffering, chose to retreat beyond the galactic rim rather than risk further vulnerability. But many others, led by a reformed Supreme Overlord who took the name Nom Anor, the Redeemed, established peaceful settlements in the unknown regions, where they could develop their biotechnology in harmony with galactic civilization. The integration of Yuuzhan Vong knowledge revolutionized Imperial science and medicine. Living buildings that grew rather than being constructed began appearing on worlds throughout the galaxy. Medical treatments using beneficial symbiotic organisms eliminated diseases that had plagued sentient species for millennia. Even space travel was transformed as hybrid biomechanical vessels offered comfort and efficiency impossible with purely technological designs. But the greatest change was in the galactic consciousness itself. The successful resolution of the Yuuzhan Vong Crisis Without Warfare proved that Anakin's philosophy of redemption and understanding could work even in the most extreme circumstances. Worlds that had maintained armies for centuries began converting their military resources to exploration and humanitarian efforts. The Jedi Order, reconstituted under Luke's guidance, evolved into something unprecedented, a community of healers and diplomats who worked alongside scientists, artists, and ordinary citizens to address challenges before they became conflicts. The old divisions between Force users and non-Force users dissolved as everyone recognized their shared responsibility for maintaining galactic harmony. Leia's role in galactic government expanded as she became the primary architect of interspecies cooperation protocols. Her experience bridging the gap between human and alien perspectives proved invaluable as the galaxy welcomed its newest members. The Senate chambers were redesigned to accommodate Yuuzhan Vong bioarchitecture alongside traditional seating, creating a visual representation of unity and diversity. On Coruscant, the Imperial Palace itself underwent transformation as living gardens integrated with its ancient stone halls. Anakin's private study became a grove of flowering trees where he could meditate, surrounded by life rather than the sterile mechanisms that had defined his earlier existence. Dr. Thorne's medical research facility grew into a living laboratory where healing arts from dozens of worlds combined to create treatments that addressed not just physical ailments but emotional and spiritual wounds as well. The success with the Yuuzhan Vong opened new possibilities for galactic expansion. Instead of conquering unknown regions, Imperial expeditions now focused on establishing cooperative relationships with whatever civilizations they encountered. Each new contact brought fresh perspectives and knowledge that enriched the entire galactic community. Young people across the galaxy found new purpose in these exploration and integration efforts. The Adventure Corps evolved into a permanent institution that offered meaningful challenges for those who might otherwise have turned to conflict or crime. Ezra Bridger established training academies on dozens of worlds where students learned not just practical skills, but the philosophy of peaceful contact and mutual benefit. As the years passed, the transformation that had begun with one man's choice to live rather than die had created a galactic civilization unlike anything in recorded history. But the greatest changes were yet to come as the next generation began to inherit the peaceful universe their parents had built through love, wisdom, and the courage to choose hope over fear. 15 years had passed since the Yuuzhan Vong integration, and the galaxy had settled into a rhythm of prosperity and growth that seemed almost too perfect to be real. On Naboo, in the same gardens where Anakin had first faced his daughter's justified anger, a very different gathering was taking place. The wedding of Emperor Anakin Skywalker and Dr. Ilara Thorne drew representatives from every corner of civilized space, creating a celebration that symbolized the unity their reign had fostered. Luke stood beside his father as they prepared for the ceremony, adjusting the simple white robes that Anakin had chosen over traditional Imperial regalia. The scars on his father's face had softened with age and happiness, and the eyes that had once glowed with Sith fury now radiated the calm contentment of a man who had found peace with himself and his place in the universe. "Are you nervous?" Luke asked, with a gentle smile. "Terrified," Anakin admitted, but his voice carried joy rather than fear. "I never imagined I would have the chance to love again, to build a family not through manipulation or control, but through choice and genuine affection." Leia arrived with her own children in tow, the next generation of Skywalkers who had grown up knowing their grandfather not as the feared Darth Vader, but as a loving family patriarch who told them stories and taught them to build things with their hands. Her son Ben, named for Obi-Wan Kenobi, showed remarkable force sensitivity but channeled it into healing and growing things rather than combat. The ceremony itself was conducted by Queen Jamila of Naboo, now elderly but still graceful, who had become like family to the Skywalkers. Representatives from hundreds of worlds attended, including Nom Anor the Redeemed, whose bioorganic gifts to the couple included living flowers that would bloom for centuries, symbolizing enduring love. As Anakin and Ilara exchanged vows beneath the same flowering tree where he had first begun to heal his relationship with Leia, the Force itself seemed to sing with harmony. Even beings without Force sensitivity could feel the rightness of the moment, the completion of a journey that had transformed not just one man, but an entire galactic civilization. The reception that followed showcased the cultural renaissance that had flourished under the new empire. Corellian musicians played alongside Twi'lek dancers, while Wookiee poets recited verses that celebrated the beauty of interspecies cooperation. Former Imperial officers danced with rebel veterans, their children playing together without knowledge of the conflicts that had once divided their parents. Han Solo, now serving as Minister of Commerce, raised a toast that brought tears to many eyes. To the man who taught us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, redemption over revenge, and hope over despair. And to the woman brave enough to see the good in someone the galaxy had written off as irredeemable. The years that followed, the wedding brought new joys and challenges as Anakin and Ilara welcomed children of their own. Their daughter, Shmi, named for Anakin's mother, inherited her father's mechanical aptitude, but used it to design toys and tools that brought happiness rather than destruction. Their son Qui-Gon, named for the Jedi Master, who had first believed in Anakin's potential, showed early signs of becoming a gifted diplomat like his stepsister Leia. The expansion of the Skywalker family coincided with preparations for Anakin's eventual succession. Now in his 70s, he had begun the careful process of transferring power to the next generation. Luke had established himself as a wise spiritual leader, but had no interest in political rule. The choice fell naturally to Leia, whose combination of diplomatic brilliance and moral authority made her the obvious heir to the throne. The transition itself became a model for peaceful succession that other governments across the galaxy studied and emulated. Instead of a dramatic transfer of power, Anakin gradually shifted responsibilities to Leia over several years, ensuring continuity while allowing her to establish her own leadership style. On the day of his official abdication, Anakin addressed the galactic community one final time as Emperor. Standing in the Senate chambers that had once witnessed Palpatine's manipulation of democratic institutions, he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. When I first claimed this throne, I was a broken man seeking redemption through service. Today I step down as someone who has learned that true power comes not from commanding others, but from empowering them to flourish. The galaxy we leave to our children is not perfect, but it is founded on principles that can guide them through whatever challenges await. The ceremony concluding his reign took place not on Coruscant, but on Tatooine, where it had all begun. Former slaves, their children, and their children's children gathered to witness the boy who had dreamed of freeing everyone finally lay down the ultimate symbol of galactic authority. The twin sons of his homeworld seemed to smile down as he removed the simple circlet that had replaced the old imperial crown, placing it in Leia's hands with a father's pride and a teacher's satisfaction. Leia's coronation as Empress marked the beginning of a new era, but one built firmly on the foundation her father had established. Her first act was to establish the Galactic Council of Healers, a body dedicated to addressing not just physical ailments, but the psychological and social wounds that could lead to conflict. Luke took on the role of Grand Master of the Reformed, Jedi Order, but his conception of the Jedi bore little resemblance to the warrior monks of the past. His Jedi were counselors, teachers, and healers who worked within communities rather than standing apart from them. Marriage and family were not forbidden, but celebrated as sources of strength and wisdom. Ezra Bridger became the first director of galactic exploration, leading expeditions that sought not to conquer, but to understand and befriend whatever civilizations they encountered. His reports described wonders beyond imagination, crystalline beings who communicated through light, gaseous entities that existed in nebulae, and ancient machines that had achieved consciousness and chose to serve rather than dominate. As the galaxy settled into this new age under Leia's wise leadership, Anakin and Alara retired to a modest home on Naboo, where they could finally enjoy the simple pleasures that had been denied to him for so long. They tended gardens, played with grandchildren, and hosted quiet dinners where former enemies had become beloved friends. The man who had once been the galaxy's greatest terror had become its most cherished grandfather, living proof that love truly could conquer any darkness. In the peaceful twilight of his years, Anakin Skywalker often sat in his garden on Naboo, watching the sun set over the lake where he had once courted Padme in what seemed like another lifetime. His grandchildren would gather around him in the evenings, begging for stories of the old days, though the tales he told were not of battles and conquests, but of the moment he chose love over fear, and how that single decision changed everything. Grandfather, young Ben Organa Solo would ask, his eyes wide with curiosity. What was it like when you decided to live instead of die? Anakin would smile, his weathered hand gentle as he ruffled the boy's hair. It was the hardest and most important choice
I ever made, little one.
For so many years I thought strength meant never showing weakness, never admitting I was wrong. But lying there, broken and dying, I realized that real strength comes from being willing to change, to grow, to become better than you were. These evening conversations became precious, not just to his family, but to the galaxy at large. Historians and philosophers traveled from across the stars to record the wisdom of the man who had transformed from destroyer to protector. His reflections on leadership, redemption, and the nature of power became required study in academies throughout Imperial space. The lessons he shared were simple but profound. Every being in this galaxy faces the same choice I faced, he would tell his students. You can choose to let your pain make you bitter and cruel, or you can choose to let it teach you compassion for others who suffer. The choice you make doesn't just affect you, it ripples outward to touch everyone you encounter. Dr. Alara Thorne, now in her 60s but still vibrant, continued her medical research while documenting her husband's insights into the healing process. Their work together had revealed deep connections between physical health and emotional well-being, showing how societies that embraced forgiveness and redemption experienced less disease and longer lifespans than those ruled by fear and hatred. Anakin's transformation wasn't just personal, she wrote in her memoirs. It was biological, psychological, and spiritual. When he chose love over fear, his entire cellular structure began to change. The dark side corruption that had aged him prematurely started to reverse itself. Love, it turns out, is not just emotionally healing, but physically restorative. The children and grandchildren who grew up during this golden age understood peace and cooperation as the natural order of things. When young Shmi Skywalker asked her father why anyone would choose war over negotiation, Anakin had to reach deep into his own dark past to explain concepts that seemed as foreign to her as ancient mythology. People fight when they're afraid, he told her gently. When they believe that there isn't enough love, enough resources, enough respect to go around. They think they have to take from others to have enough for themselves. But we've learned that when you give love freely, it multiplies. When you share resources generously, abundance flows back to you. Luke's own children, trained in the new Jedi ways, embodied this philosophy completely. They saw the Force not as a tool for power, but as a web of connection that linked all living things. Their approach to conflict resolution involved helping disputants understand their shared humanity rather than determining who was right or wrong. The galactic government that Leia had inherited and refined reflected these same principles. The Senate operated on consensus building rather than majority rule, ensuring that minority voices were heard and valued. Legislation focused on addressing root causes of problems rather than simply punishing symptoms. Economic policy had been revolutionized to prioritize well-being over pure profit. The Universal Basic Resources Program ensured that every being in the galaxy had access to food, shelter, healthcare, and education, freeing them to pursue their passions and contribute their unique gifts to society. This security, paradoxically, increased rather than decreased motivation, as people worked not from desperation, but from desire to contribute to something meaningful. The transformation was perhaps most visible in how the galaxy handled challenges that arose. When a plague threatened several outer rim worlds, the response was immediate and comprehensive. Medical teams from every major world volunteered to help, while scientists shared research freely rather than competing for profit. The crisis that could have devastated entire systems was contained within months through unprecedented cooperation. Similarly, when a rogue Imperial admiral attempted to establish his own fiefdom in the unknown regions, the response followed Anakin's principles.
Rather than old Imperial doctrine.
Instead of crushing the rebellion with overwhelming force, Empress Leia sent negotiators to understand the admiral's grievances. They discovered that his rebellion stemmed from feeling unheard and undervalued, concerns that were addressed through dialogue and structural changes that gave local commanders more autonomy. The cultural impact of this transformation was equally profound. Art, music, and literature flourished as creators were freed from censorship and supported to explore themes of hope, healing, and human potential. The great libraries that had been destroyed during the Empire's reign were rebuilt and expanded, becoming centers of learning that attracted scholars from across the galaxy. On worlds that had been devastated by war, memorial gardens now marked sites of former battles. These gardens served not to glorify conflict but to remember its costs and renew commitment to peaceful resolution. Children from former enemy worlds played together in these gardens, their laughter a testament to how completely the cycle of
hatred had been broken. The Force itself seemed to respond to this galactic healing.
Jedi reported that their connection to the living energy field had never been stronger, while even non-Force sensitive beings described feeling more attuned to the natural rhythms of life. Ancient Jedi temples that had been dark for generations began to glow with gentle light, as if the very stones were celebrating the return of balance. Anakin's final public appearance came on the 50th anniversary of his choice to live rather than die. Standing before representatives from every world in the galaxy, his hair now silver, but his voice still strong, he delivered words that would be carved into monuments across the stars. I stand before you not as a former emperor or a redeemed Sith, but as living proof that no one is beyond redemption, no wound is beyond healing, no darkness is beyond the reach of light. The galaxy we have built together shows that love truly is the most powerful force in the universe. And so we come to the end of our journey through this alternative timeline where one man's choice to embrace love instead of surrendering to death transformed an entire galaxy. As night falls across countless worlds, from the bustling cities of Coruscant to the peaceful farms of Tatooine, beings everywhere sleep soundly under the protection of an empire that guards rather than oppresses. In the gardens of Naboo, an elderly Anakin Skywalker sits quietly beside the lake, his hand intertwined with Ilara's as they watch their grandchildren chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The man who once breathed through a mechanical mask now draws each breath freely, savoring the sweet evening air that carries the scent of flowers his wife has planted around their modest home. Luke and his family have arrived for their weekly dinner, a tradition that has continued for decades. His children call their grandfather Papa Annie and climb into his lap to hear stories of the old days when the galaxy was learning to hope again. Tonight, little Shmi falls asleep against his chest as he tells her about the moment he first saw her grandmother Leia's face and knew that love was stronger than any empire. Across the galaxy, Empress Leia concludes her evening meditation in Inchultu, the palace gardens on Coruscant. The cares of leadership rest lightly on her shoulders because she rules a people who have learned to care for each other. Her own children sleep peacefully in chambers where the walls themselves are alive, bioorganic materials gifted by their Yuuzhan Vong allies that respond to the inhabitants' emotional needs with gentle bioluminescence. On distant worlds, former enemies now tuck their children into bed side by side. The Twi'lek descendants of freed slaves read bedtime stories to human children whose grandparents once enforced those very chains. Wookiee cubs and young Ewoks play together in forests that have regrown after decades of careful restoration. Even the harsh deserts of Tatooine bloom, with life as moisture farms have given way to atmospheric processors that bring gentle rains to the twin-sunned world. In the unknown regions, Ezra Bridger's exploration teams set up camp beside alien ruins, sharing meals and stories with newly contacted civilizations who marvel at the concept of a galactic government based on protection rather than conquest. Each new species they encounter adds its own wisdom to the growing tapestry of peaceful cooperation that spans the stars. The space lanes that once carried star destroyers on missions of terror now buzz with merchant vessels, hospital ships, and family transports bringing loved ones together across vast distances. Pirates and smugglers have largely vanished, their children choosing honest work in a galaxy where opportunity abounds for those willing to contribute to the common good. On by Kashyyyk, ancient Wookiee elders sit around ceremonial fires, passing down oral traditions that now include the story of the Dark Lord who learned to love. Their songs speak of transformation and redemption, of how even the mightiest predator can become a protector when touched by compassion. In the medical centers that Dr. Thorne established across the galaxy, healers work through the night, tending to the sick and injured. But their patients suffer mostly from accidents and natural ailments rather than the wounds of war. The trauma wards that once overflowed with victims of Imperial brutality have been converted to research facilities where scientists study the mysteries of life and consciousness. The Jedi temples glow softly in the darkness, their ancient stones warm with the presence of Force users who have learned to channel their abilities in service of peace. Luke's reformed order maintains no armies, builds no weapons, trains no warriors. Instead, they serve as counselors, teachers, and healers, their lightsabers transformed from instruments of combat into tools of precision and artistry. Even in the deepest reaches of space, automated beacon stations broadcast messages of hope and welcome to any travelers who might encounter them. These signals, sent out in thousands of languages and communication formats, carry the simple message that has defined this new galactic age: you are not alone. You are welcome here. There is a place for you among the stars. As the galaxy settles into peaceful sleep, the Force itself seems to sigh with contentment. The ancient energies that once swirled with conflict and darkness now flow in harmony, connecting every living thing in a web of mutual support and understanding. Young Force sensitives across the galaxy dream of futures filled with wonder and discovery rather than conflict and survival. In his garden on Naboo, Anakin feels this cosmic peace wash over him like a gentle tide. His own connection to the Force has evolved beyond anything the Jedi or Sith of old could have imagined. He senses not power to be wielded, but love to be shared. Not dominion to be claimed, but service to be offered.
Thank you, he whispers to the stars, to Padme's memory, to Obi-Wan's spirit, to the Force itself. Thank you for the chance to choose love over fear, to become a father rather than a destroyer, to leave the galaxy better than I found it.
Elara squeezes his hand gently, and they sit together in comfortable silence as the moons of Naboo rise over the lake. Around them, the gardens they have tended together bloom with life from a dozen worlds, a living symbol of the diversity and beauty that flourishes when fear gives way to love. Tonight, as every night in this transformed galaxy, children fall asleep to lullabies instead of air raid sirens. Parents kiss their little ones goodnight, knowing they will wake to a world of opportunity and hope. Lovers hold each other close under starlight that no longer hides fleets of war, but carries the gentle traffic of a civilization at peace with itself. And in the quantum fabric of space itself, in the mysterious energy field that binds all living things together, there is a new harmony. The Force has remembered its true purpose, not to grant power over others, but to connect all beings in an eternal dance of love, growth, and infinite possibility. Sweet dreams, gentle traveler. May your own choices lead you toward the light, and may you find in this story the same hope that transformed a galaxy and proved that love, indeed, conquers all.